Priyanka. Thank you so much for being on my show and, of course, for opening your space to have this conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, I think for us, having the community come in to learn about what we do, it means so much because I always say this, that it's not about swapping fashion, but it's about swapping mindsets. And it's
Right.
conversations like this that help us do what we want to do.
All right. I want to start with this. Can you share with us what fast fashion is and why has it become so popular in the recent years?
So to put it into perspective, fashion today has 52 micro seasons. That means every single week, new clothes are being produced. So that's fast. And that really explains why it's now called fast fashion.
All right.
So with 52 micro seasons, you can tell the amount of overproduction, but we are also fueling the problem by buying too much. Women today wear only 20% on an average of what we actually own. The other thing about fast fashion is we assume that it's brands of a lower rung. But that is a big misconception because today all fashion is actually fast fashion. It is all mass produced. It's all produced in factories that are like sweatshops with unregulated practices that are terrible for the environment, for the people, and for animals as well.
But do they overproduce because we overconsume, or is it the other way around?
I think it is a supply demand issue, of course, but I think it's become mindless. The industry produces more and we mindlessly consume. And there is this sort of vicious cycle around production and consumption, and it needs to stop somewhere. But from the industry's perspective, it's hard for them to stop because, in a sense, it's working, right? They are producing more and we're buying more. So
It's a business.
it is a business and it is capitalistic in that sense. So it's very hard for us to say they should stop doing what they're doing because that's how they've survived for decades. So I do think the onus is now upon us to say, if we stop consuming, they will stop producing. So it doesn't matter who started. It's the chicken and egg story. It doesn't matter where it started. It's got to stop.
And what is the environmental impact of supporting fast fashion? Can you give us some statistics to highlight the scale of the problem of supporting fast fashion industry?
So in a nutshell, fashion is the second largest polluting industry globally after oil and gas. So we always think of the oil and gas industry being really dirty, and we talk about that a lot, but we don't realize that fashion is actually second. So that's, I think, the big fact that we really need to know about. Now, across the entire fashion supply chain, which means from the time a fiber is produced, so we wear a lot of cotton. So from the time cotton is produced, for example, to the next stage, which means the fabric is actually made, to the next stage, which means clothes are then being produced, after which clothes are finished by putting buttons and zippers and things on it. Then they are quality controlled, and then they are shipped to different parts of the world. Also, a lot of these steps in the process involve transportation. So, for example, a fiber may be produced in country A. It'll then be sent to country B to make the fabric, country C to actually start the product and create, the base of it. The third country, the fourth country in the process might be finishing the product, and then it goes into the fifth country, which will be quality check, and then it'll be distributed to the whole world. So just the footprint of the transport alone is humongous. And then we talk about consumption. So even when we buy it, when we buy products, we wash them. Washing machines, actually, there are microplastics on each of our clothes, which are shed into washing machines that go into our water bodies. And finally, when we throw items away in landfills, there's also a problem. Now, what is the problem, right? So the reason I had to outline the supply chain is because it's very murky. There are many stages. They're all unregulated. And at every stage, there are huge problems. Problems that result in, for example, when it comes to cotton, let's talk about the first stage. When it comes to cotton, you have things like water. Cotton is firstly a very thirsty plant, so it uses a lot of water. A single cotton t-shirt takes 2,700 liters of water to produce. More than that, you're also using pesticides, which are, again, chemicals that are very harmful. They are corroding soil. They are killing ecosystems around. There are water bodies that have dried up because of the use of chemicals in the production process. In fact, about 1800 chemicals are used on a single garment, and a lot of them are unregulated. So those are just some of the problems in the fashion industry. And without it getting too heavy, I won't go into all the stages, but the final stage of when we throw a garment away, it reaches a landfill. And closer to home in Singapore, we only have one landfill, the Semakau landfill. But the problem is not just that it's taking space in the landfill. The problem is that these 1800 chemicals, while they try to break down, actually exude greenhouse gases into the environment because of these unregulated chemicals. So our fashion is causing global warming.
Wow, that's a lot to take in actually. And you're basically saying that the planet is dying, and here we are worrying that we don't have clothes to wear. Although our closet is full of clothes that is in good condition, and as you mentioned, only 20% of our closet is what we are wearing. And the thing is, when we buy clothes, when we shop for new clothes, we don't look at the clothes and think, what is the possible environmental impact of this piece of bikini or whatever, right? We buy because it makes us feel good. It makes us look good. We buy because we can buy it. We buy for the sake of buying. We buy because we can afford them.
Yes.
But after hearing what you have just said, which is a lot, right? My thought is, okay, how can we change this? Maybe you can start by inspiring us with your story. I'm curious to know what was your fashion choices prior to founding Swapaholic, and how does your spending or shopping habits has changed over the years?
Yeah, I just want to sort of react and respond also to what you said. I think it isn't about the price tag of an item, because we think the cost of an item is on the price tag. But the true cost is really the environmental damage. Also, we haven't even gotten into the workers, the exploitation of workers, the abuse of animals. We haven't gotten into all of those things yet. And so we don't realize that the price is not the $5 or $10 or $20 that we find so affordable. The price is actually what's happened. The true cost is what's happened to the environment, people, animals in the process of making this particular garment. And I think that's the way we need to look. And anyone who wants to dig deeper, there is a documentary called The True Cost, which actually uncovers this. And I also recommend another documentary called Slay, which talks about the use of animal skins in the industry. And it isn't very gruesome, but it's put very beautifully, and it is something we all need to know. We recently hosted Singapore's premiere screening of Slay, actually, at the projector with the director, Rebecca Cavalli. And it's something that's so brilliant. But coming to my story, today I'm very embarrassed to talk about it, of course, but I was one of those people who prided myself on never repeating an outfit. And this was well before the Instagram days.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, I suppose when you start talking about it, it does, because a lot of us are like that. And it was really a badge of honor for me. And it was almost an addiction, that consumerist behavior, because around that time, the advent of online shopping had just begun. So there was like a parcel at my doorstep almost every week. And I bought it because I could afford it, right? It was so inexpensive. When I went on holidays, it was around what the best shopping was. It was, I would pack suitcases that were empty. I would have lists of things that didn't involve what to see, but more of what to buy. I would buy for other people. I would buy extra luggage beforehand, knowing that on the way back I would have more things, and I would come back with suitcases full of new things just for the sake of it. So I was really one of the culprits. And when I learned that fashion was the second largest polluting industry, I think it was a real shock for someone like me, because I also thought I was fairly well read, well exposed. And so I didn't understand how I had missed the fact of connecting these dots. That if something's so cheap and mass produced, there must be an impact. I didn't think about the waste. And that was the beginning of my journey to say, how can I be a part of the solution? What can I do to change this? And that's when I started looking into many different avenues and ways to sort of try and mitigate the damage.
It's interesting that you mentioned the ethical part of the fashion industry because a couple of weeks ago, yes, I attended this panel discussion. It's called Who Make My Clothes?
Yes.
It's a question that we don't really ask ourselves, right? We, again, like what I've said, we buy for the sake of buying. We buy because we can. We don't really ask questions like, is the person who made this clothes actually in a good working condition, or is someone from Bangladesh, is a child making these garments, right? Um, One of the solutions that was being presented during the panel discussion was to support shops that embrace sustainability. That means those shops make sure that their employees are paid really well, and they are in a good working condition, and they only use eco-friendly materials. And they talk about the sustainable fashion concept. Can you explain what sustainable fashion concept is and how it can help to minimize the negative impact of fashion industry?
So I think there are 2 points here, right? One, you're talking about the ethics. And when it comes to ethics, there is a lot of greenwashing in the industry, which essentially means that we don't really know what's going on. Because of the supply chain that I spoke about earlier, it's very murky. And brands often don't know who's producing their clothes because they give the contract to someone who subcontracts it through many stages, and then finally it's made by a worker, like you said, in Bangladesh or Turkey, who may be working in a sweatshop, may be working from home, may be punished, may be abused, there may be child labor involved. There are a lot of factors at play here. That's why it's so murky. So even when you read something that's organic or ethical, these are just words. How do you corroborate those words? And so it is, of course, our responsibility to try and look deeper and make sure that brands are not greenwashing, but it is very tricky to do that. So when you talk about the exploitation of workers, and if you went to this talk, you must have heard about the collapse of Rana Plaza.
Yeah.
So, for those listening, Rana Plaza was a Bangladeshi factory that collapsed in 2013, I believe, killing over 1,000 workers. And these workers, and this factory produced for some of the biggest brands that we know. So you can think of a brand, and again, I don't want to name names because everyone is trying to do their best, I think, or I hope at least, to move forward and to do better from then. But this particular factory produced for brands that we all know and all have in our closet. And workers protested. Workers said, we don't want to go to work. They were physically abused, they were punished, they don't work, they work on daily wages. So if they don't go to work, that means there's no food on the table that particular day. It is that bad, the situation. They were forced to go to work, and sure enough, this particular factory crumbled, waking up a section of the world to say, wait a minute, we need to do something about it. And that's when Fashion Revolution began, the Who Made My Clothes campaign. Because there's a person who has made your clothes. We walk in, we become apathetic because we come onto a beautiful store, we see clothes displayed very beautifully. It's very easy for us to forget the ugliness behind the scenes. So I think that's the first aspect of the question. Now talking about what is sustainable fashion and what should it look like for us. The first thing is to use resources that exist, because going back to the 52 micro seasons, there are so many clothes that already exist that are underused. We need to use those. And where does it start? It really starts with using what you have. And I love this, there's this lady called Sarah Lazarovic, and she created this hierarchy of needs. It's essentially this pyramid. And if you start at the bottom of the pyramid, it's about use what you have first. So use what you have. Chances are we all already have what we want. Next is borrow. If not, then swap. Then consider thrifting. Then consider making, and finally consider buying. And looking at this, doing it in this way, you're also not making compromises. You can have new fashion, you can refresh your closet, but just in a way that's more thoughtful and sustainable. And then when you go to the top and you think about buying, the top of this pyramid, you think about buying clothes that are sustainable and made ethically, using products that are good for the environment, that haven't been made in a way that harms workers or animals. And considering buying from brands that not just say that, but actually live that and do it. Very often we think the price tag of those brands are too expensive for us. When it comes to secondhand, you can afford it, but when it comes to those brands, you can't. Again, we need to think about the true cost. Because when you're buying something that is poorly made and costs $5, it's going to crumble. You can only wear it so many times.
Yep.
But when you think of maybe a sustainable brand, you think about the way it was made. You might be able to wear it for longer. It'll last longer. You'll be able to do more with it for longer.
Personally, what I do is I would normally buy more like good quality clothes so I don't have to buy that often, and then I'm gonna wear them a million times until I can no longer wear them and I have to let them go.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's enough, right? What are the other alternatives, fashion choices that we can start doing, that we can start embracing and practicing to embrace sustainable fashion?
I think it's all of the things that we've been talking about, so it's really about swapping, of course, renting,
Uh-huh.
and looking at sustainable options. I think those are, thrifting, those are all options. And if you haven't tried them yet, come to our store in Center Point and start your journey here. No one's saying this is the be all and end all. Today, we were discussing this just before the camera has turned on, but 6 years ago, no one knew about sustainable fashion.
Yep.
Preloved fashion was, it was treated in a very different thought process. It was assumed that it was unhygienic or unfashionable. Today, the conversation has changed. It's not just about Swapaholic. There are many, many alternatives. But you can start your journey somewhere which makes you comfortable to see that pre-loved fashion, secondhand fashion, isn't actually what you might have thought it was. It's actually really fun. And remember, there are 52 micro seasons. So what you're looking at in the store is not 5 years ago, but maybe 5 weeks ago was on the shelves, right? So it's still really it's still in trend. If you're one of those people who's going after trends and not a sense of personal style, there is something for everyone, and it also makes you very unique. So thinking about secondhand in that way, and of course thinking about sustainable brands that produce ethically, like we spoke about, thinking about them in the way that you think about fashion, buying pieces that will last, that tell a story, that you feel proud to wear. So I do think those are the options that one can avail of. And I also want to add here, I think in the past, we were not sustainable because it was inconvenient. That's that's a human behavior. Where I'm guilty of it. I do things that are more convenient for me. But today, sustainable fashion is not inconvenient anymore. It's as convenient as first-hand fashion. So the whole point is to begin with swapping that mindset to say, I want to do it. Because once you decide, there are today a whole sea and ocean of options that you can avail of.
I love that you mentioned swapping of mindset. Now, going back to the hierarchy by Sarah Lefrick, you mentioned that there's looking at what we already own, borrowing, thrifting,
Swapping.
and then swapping.
No, so
Swapping,
then thrifting.
then thrifting.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are familiar with borrowing, which is equivalent to renting.
Yeah.
And then there's secondhand shop thrifting.
Yeah.
But not a lot of people, including myself, is familiar with swapping, with
Yeah.
the concept of swapping. Can you walk us through how our listeners can do swapping of clothes?
So, okay, if you're doing it with essentially just like the name suggests, it's a barter, right? You swap in something, you can swap out something else. If you're doing it with Swapaholic, this is how we do it. You come into Swapaholic, you bring the clothes that you want to swap in. They go through a quality check to make sure that they're suitable for other swappers. Once your items pass the quality check, you get points for each of your items. Those points are then the currency that you can use to swap out anything you fancy. So your items might earn 20 points, and then you can use those 20 points to swap out anything you fancy, whether it's 5 items or 1. It really depends on what you're looking for. And these points are also valid for 6 months. So you don't have the pressure of saying, I have to do this today. You have you can just say, I will come back until I really like something and I want to let it into my closet and life. That was really the idea. There is a service fee associated with swapping, and you just pay a tiny service fee upfront, which helps us essentially pay our staff and run the business and pay for the overheads, which, again, early years, people didn't understand why we had to do that. Now, this is how we do it at Swapaholic. But I think this conversation goes beyond that. And you can swap with your friends as well. You can swap with anyone in your community. You can have a swap meet or swap party in your own home if you feel like it. The idea is just to circulate resources rather than putting a burden on the planet of creating new.
And buying new clothes
Yeah.
from time to time. Um, I love that you mentioned you can swap it within your friends or circle of friends, because I was having this conversation with my friend because I was in the Philippines a few days ago, and I mentioned about the concept of swapping, and then she said, I don't think it's available here in the Philippines. And for those who are listening and the swapping of clothes is not available yet in their country, what they can start doing today.
I think just host a swap party. You'll be surprised. I know people who've done it. We have student groups who've done it. We have friends who've done it.
Mm-hmm.
And they've borrowed our racks just to help them, get started. And it's a lot of fun.
I
In
think it's fun because you can refresh your closet without breaking your bank, basically, by just, like, again, what you have mentioned, by maximizing what you already own.
And you don't have to get into the complicated aspect of the points or anything like that. It can literally be a one for one swap, which just simplifies it. So everyone
Mm-hmm.
just brings their clothes, everyone hangs their own clothes, and you just pick out what you want.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a really nice way of connecting with the community, showing you care to our environment, but still having a lot of fun
Mm-hmm.
in an inexpensive way. So I highly recommend it.
And what's the role of secondhand shopping and swapping in minimizing the fashion footprint that we have?
So it's a very tangible.
Mm-hmm.
Today, again, these statistics weren't available so many years ago, but today they are. Every time you choose a second-hand item, whether it's through swapping or thrifting or selling or buying secondhand, you offset 7.8 kilograms of carbon emissions. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very significant.
Mm-hmm.
Almost 8 kilos of carbon emissions every time you choose secondhand over something new. And that's the first thing to sort of consider. But essentially, what are we doing? We are saying that there are certain resources that exist in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Let's reuse them, let's recycle them. By demanding less new fashion, we will force the industry to slow down
Mm-hmm.
their production. And if they slow down their production, we'll also slow down the pace of global warming because of all the things that we discussed previously.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel the power lies in our hands as consumers.
Mm. But in a world where literally in just one click, you can have new clothes in an instant deliver at your doorstep, and if you don't like them, you can just send it back, right? How can you navigate the pressure of always updating your wardrobe and the pressure of always needing new and trendy clothes?
So, like I said, firstly, it's become really convenient to do this secondhand.
Mm-hmm.
Swapaholic, for example, on our online website, you can literally do that. Add to cart, checkout.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to returns, gosh, it's such an awful thing. But most companies, and I'm forgetting the percentage, but it's a ridiculously high percentage, about 80 or 90% of clothes, when you return them, are actually thrown into a landfill. Because the pressure for a company to
Mm-hmm.
actually, or the cost associated with actually repacking it, quality checking it, putting it back
Mm-hmm.
on the online store is too much. It's cheaper just to throw it away. So returns is really not a solution.
Mm-hmm.
You're better off then donating it rather than returning it, because the footprint again of the transportation and all the things that go with it, it's going to end up in a landfill. So that's the issue with returns.
Mm-hmm.
But coming back to the point, so today thrift stores online, there are lots of options
Mm-hmm.
to do this whole add to cart business, which again becomes easy and is more convenient
Mm-hmm.
for you. So you can still remain relevant, you can still constantly refresh your closet. There's rental, which is an amazing option today.
Mm-hmm.
You can rent such cute clothes,
Yep.
and they're not just fancy gowns. You can also rent daily wear, things to office, things to an event that may be a little more low key, but you still want to be really fashionable. There are so many options that you can avail of, and it just begins with taking the step of saying, I want to do it. It's just the decision that you actually make.
But okay, when we look at the grander scale of things, when I was actually doing the research for this episode, I was like, I want to just curl up in a ball because I feel like there's no point. I mean, this problem is huge, and even if today I decide not to buy new clothes for the rest of my life, I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it will make much of a difference. But you can change my mind. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's thinking this way, because when you have this conversation, a lot of people will say, oh, it's for other people to solve. It's not ours. Let the people in power solve that. So my question is, does individual choice really make an impact, and what does it do?
Okay, so I know the feeling you described because, of course, there have been phases when I was discovering. I felt that
Uh-huh.
way myself, and there is a
It's
term for it.
depressing.
Yeah, but there's a term for it. It's called eco anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all felt it at some time or the other. But then I think the choice we've made at Swapaholic is to have one of hope
Mm-hmm.
and say that if we feel so anxious that we don't do anything about it,
Mm-hmm.
nothing's going to change. Now, in the fashion industry in particular, every drop counts. And every drop is a huge drop.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, even if you're just choosing secondhand, that's 7.8 kilograms of fashion every time of carbon emissions that you've offset every time you choose secondhand
Mm-hmm.
fashion. So it's a huge saving to begin with. So we do have to consider that our action really, really, really counts. When it comes to fashion, again in particular, it's the supply and demand that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
As consumers, when we say, I will not buy this, the industry has to make change. When we decide, every time we vote with our dollar to buy secondhand or rent or swap or use what's in our closet or not to buy anything at all,
Mm-hmm.
we are making a big, bold statement to say we will not buy new. And every time we do that, the industry is going to have to slow down more and more and more. So the idea is to make a vote with your dollar to be more sustainable, and it is going to impact the industry. It is going to impact how they produce unsustainably and how they have to slow the pace down, which
Mm-hmm.
in effect slows down the pace of global warming. So when it comes to fashion, the impact is huge. And our action counts more than ever because of everything we've spoken about. Us speaking out, us asking brands, we are the people they're selling to. If
Mm-hmm.
the people the industry is selling to says, I will not buy it unless it meets ethical standards and sustainable standards, the industry has to listen. So it does make a huge impact.
And if there's one thing that listeners can do today after they listen to this episode, what is that one thing to that what is that one thing that they can do to make or to become part of the solution?
I think firstly, look at your wardrobe. Go in, look at your
First step, look at
yeah,
your
yeah,
wardrobe.
look in your closet and say, what are the things I'm using and what are the things I'm not using?
Mm-hmm.
Make it a closet of things that you love. The
Mm-hmm.
remaining items, sell them, swap them, donate them, because that will also, getting to know yourself in this way and getting to know what you use will help you make choices that are not just about impulse purchases, where you begin to think, okay, this is what I want to let into my world and life. So it'll help you make certain consumption
Mm-hmm.
choices. The other thing that I like to do when I'm tempted, and I'm very often still tempted to buy things, I'm nowhere near perfect today, when these retargeted ads chase me online, I'll add the item to the cart that I love. And if I still really want it in a couple of days, I'll start thinking about where will I wear it? How many times will I wear it? Do I have something similar? And usually the answer, do I have something similar, is always yes. But, but what I do is I pause and reflect. So that's
Mm-hmm.
really work for me. For my friends who, are very into savings and finances, the way
Mm-hmm.
they look at this is that every time they choose to buy something secondhand or not to buy it at all, they actually make a note of the savings.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the year, they calculate how much money they saved just by being more sustainable and not buying unconsciously. But I think overall, my I think it's about conversations like this that help you swap your mindset. So it begins there. It begins with you saying, I want to be a part of the solution, because then you will
Mm-hmm.
find ways to be a part of the solution that is no longer inconvenient. It's very convenient, it's pocket friendly, and it's a lot of fun and it's fashionable. So you're making no compromises
Mm-hmm.
today in being sustainable. So once you switch your mindset, there will be so many options that open up for you.
And as a financial consultant slash financial educator, I am actually coming from a place where I want to educate people on how they can make better financial decisions, and that includes making conscious effort, conscious decision on where are they gonna spend their money. But I realized after having this conversation, not only they're gonna save money, which is good for their pocket, but we can also save our planet. And thank you so much for sharing what you have shared with us today. And I'm pretty sure our listeners would love to know where can we find you, where we can find Swapaholic, and how we can participate in this movement.
So you can find us on all social media. Tiara, don't kill me if I'm wrong. At Swapaholic U, which is on um, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Telegram, and LinkedIn as well, of course. So you can find us on all of those places. And if you just feel like coming down to Centerpoint Orchard, you will find us here. And this is a great starting point to see how you can work with us. One of our retail therapists or members of the Swap Squad will be happy to talk you through everything there is to know about swapping and how you can interact with us. And today at Swapaholic, you can swap, sell, and buy fashion. So you can find out about all our service offerings online as well.
Priyanka, thank you so much again for sharing your love, your light today on my podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Wake up and swap!